Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. I never thought my life would be tested in such cruel and unexpected ways. My name is Alina. I am 32 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that the strength of family could withstand anything. I was wrong. Family can be both your greatest comfort and your deepest undoing. I learned that lesson slowly, painfully, as each layer of my carefully built world was peeled away by betrayal, by desperation, and by choices I never imagined I would have to make. This is the story of how my loyalty to my brother pulled me into the darkest chapter of my life, and how I was forced to discover the limits of sacrifice, survival, and self-respect. I grew up in a small town where people knew each other's names, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, and where appearances mattered almost as much as the truth. My parents raised my brother Sasha and me in a modest home that always smelled of fresh bread and soap. My mother worked as a teacher, patient and kind, the type of woman who remembered every student's birthday. My father was a carpenter, his hands rough and scarred, but his embrace gentle. For a long time, I believed we were blessed. But childhood illusions have a way of shattering. When I was 19, my father passed suddenly from a heart attack. The loss carved a wound into our family that never healed properly. My mother retreated into her quiet grief, and my brother Sachet, 2 years younger than me, became restless. He was charming, good-looking, quick to make friends, but he lacked direction. While I threw myself into my studies, determined to build a stable life, Sasha drifted toward trouble. At first it was small things: skipping classes, falling in with reckless friends, borrowing money he couldn't repay. But as the years went on, those choices became heavier, darker, and harder to forgive. By the time I was 32, I had built a life that I thought was solid. I worked as a project manager at a local firm, lived in a tidy apartment, and enjoyed the simple routines of adulthood. I wasn't wealthy, but I was proud of the independence I had carved for myself. Sasha, on the other hand, was drowning. He had lost job after job, each time blaming bad luck, bad bosses, bad timing. What he never blamed was himself, with the addiction that had quietly taken root in his life. Gambling, drinking, late-night escapades that ended with him begging for money from me, from our mother, from anyone who would listen. I tried to help him over and over, but helping Sasha was like pouring water into a cracked pot. Nothing held. Nothing lasted. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, almost midnight, when I heard the pounding on my door. I opened it to find Sasha standing there, his face pale, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cool air outside. His eyes darted around like a hunted animal. I knew immediately that something was wrong. He stumbled into my apartment, clutching his side as though he had been hit. When I demanded to know what had happened, he whispered the name that made my stomach drop: Igor. Igor was not a man you wanted to owe anything to. Everyone in our town knew his reputation. He ran businesses that looked legitimate on paper, but behind the polished facades there were whispers of loan sharking, intimidation, and debts that could never be repaid. He was calm, always dressed immaculately, but his calm was the kind that hid storms. Sasha admitted he had borrowed money from Igor months ago, far more than he could ever repay. He had promised quick returns, swore he'd win it back gambling, but of course he lost it all. Now Igor wanted his payment and Sasha didn't have it. I felt my blood run cold. I scolded him, of course, shouted that he was reckless, selfish, and destroying not only his life but mine too. But beneath my anger was fear. I knew what Igor was capable of. Debts with him didn't disappear. They grew, mutated, consumed you whole. Sasha begged me to help him. He swore he would change, swore this was the last time. I had heard those promises before, and I didn't believe them anymore. But he was my brother, the only family I had left besides my fragile mother. And so, against my better judgment, I agreed to accompany him to meet Igor the next day. I will never forget walking into Igor's office. It was located above a sleek restaurant, hidden in plain sight. The room was decorated tastefully, almost elegantly dark wood furniture. Shelves lined with books and expensive bottles of liquor. But the atmosphere was suffocating. Igor sat behind a large desk, his fingers steepled, his eyes sharp and calculating. He welcomed us politely, almost warmly, which made it worse. Danger wrapped in courtesy is more terrifying than open aggression. Sasha stammered through excuses, promises, apologies. Igor listened patiently, like a teacher listening to a foolish child. Then he shifted his gaze to me. It was a gaze that stripped me bare, that measured me not as a person, but as a solution. He told me calmly that Sasha's debt had reached a point beyond money. Interest, delays, broken promises had all piled into a mountain impossible to climb. And then, with chilling composure, he made his proposal. If I agreed to stand by Sasha to guarantee his debt, to take responsibility for him, then Igor would extend mercy. But it came with conditions. He wanted my presence, my loyalty, my time. He wanted me tethered to him. I was speechless. It wasn't a marriage proposal in the romantic sense. It was a contract disguised as one. A way to ensure control over me and through me, control over Sasha. Igor saw my shock and smiled faintly. He told me to take my time, but not too much time. Debts, he said, are like shadows. They only grow longer as the sun goes down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the meeting in my head over and over. I thought about my brother, about my mother, about the life I had worked so hard to build. I felt trapped between impossible choices. If I refused Igor, I risked losing Sasha to a fate I didn't want to imagine. If I agreed, I would be sacrificing myself, my freedom, my future. How do you choose between yourself and your blood? Oh. Do you weigh the scales when every option is heavy with loss? Days turned into weeks, and Igor was patient but firm. He began to appear in my life in subtle ways at the cafe I visited, at the market outside my workplace. Always polite, always calm, but his presence was a constant reminder of the noose tightening around us. Sasha grew more desperate, more reckless, as if the pressure made him crumble faster. He promised me he would find another way, but his attempts were futile. The more he tried, the deeper we sank. Eventually, I realized I had no choice. I met Igor again, this time alone. I told him I would agree to his terms, but I wanted guarantees: Sasha's safety, my mother's safety, protection from the storm that my brother had unleashed. Igor listened carefully, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something almost human in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or amusement that I dared negotiate. He agreed, and just like that, my fate was sealed. Life with Igor was not what I expected. He didn't treat me cruelly, but he didn't treat me kindly either. I was an obligation fulfilled, a symbol of his control. He paraded me at events, introduced me as though I were his choice rather than his conquest. People whispered, speculated, wondered how a woman like me had ended up with a man like him. They never knew the truth, that I was paying a debt that wasn't mine, carrying a burden I hadn't chosen. Inside, I felt like a ghost. I smiled when expected, spoke when required, but my soul lived elsewhere, trapped in the memory of freedom. Sasha, for a while, was safe. Igor kept his word. He stayed alive, untouched, though still hopelessly lost in his addictions. I resented him deeply, but I couldn't stop loving him. That was the cruelty of love, that doesn't diminish even when it destroys you. My mother never knew the full truth. I shielded her from it, carrying the secret alone. She thought I had found stability, maybe even love. Sometimes I wished I could let her believe it fully. It's because the lie was kinder than the reality. Months stretched into years, and I learned to survive. I learned to compartmentalize, to build walls inside myself. But there were nights when I would stare at the ceiling, tears slipping silently into my pillow, and wonder, was this really loyalty, or was it foolishness? Had I saved my brother, or had I doomed myself? The breaking point came when Sasha betrayed me again. Despite everything, despite the sacrifices, he returned to his old ways. He gambled, he borrowed, he lied. He came to me one night, eyes wild, begging again for help. That was when I realized the truth. My sacrifices had not saved him. They had enabled him. I had given up everything for a man who would never change, never learn, and Igor knew it. He watched me with that same calm expression, as if he had known from the beginning how this story would unfold. It was then I made a decision, not for Sasha, not for Igor, but for myself. I began to plan my escape quietly, carefully. It took months, maybe years of small steps, hidden savings, secret contacts. But one day I walked away, not without scars, not without fear, but with the knowledge that I could not let my life be defined by someone else's mistakes. Today, as I tell you this story, I don't claim to be a hero. I am simply a woman who loved too deeply, who paid too dearly, and who finally learned that loyalty must have limits. Family is important, yes, but no love, no bond, no obligation is worth the loss of your soul.